Welcome back, friends, to Brother Owl's Garden. I would like to acknowledge the viewers who take a moment to subscribe in reciprocation of the content that you receive on this channel, which is created with the very best intention to be practical, useful, and helpful. And your reciprocation by means of subscribing, it doesn't do anything for me, but what it does do is it helps many other people like you who haven't discovered our channel yet to be introduced to it and receive the same content. Thank you, and I honor you. Those of you who have chosen to subscribe to the channel, thank you. We have a wonderful guest, a returning guest. This is actually his fifth visit. I was thinking it was the fourth, but it's actually the fifth visit. A wonderful dear friend, and I will vouch that he is also one of the most integritous, honorable, authentic, accessible, sincere, and upstanding human beings I have ever known. Dear friends, let's welcome back to the platform, Deng Ming-Dao.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with you.
Well, it's always a great pleasure and a great honor, and it's also a real feel-good vibe because as I've said to you in person, I'm honored to call you brother. I really love who you are, and I'm
really
honored
to be here.
Thank you. Today, things are rough around the world, but the Tao remains ever pure, and it seems that humanity would do well to revisit the values, tenets, and qualities of living in harmony with Tao. What do you think?
Well, can I pick up on that idea of revisiting? That means we already have access to Tao. And one of the ideas is, what is the importance of ancient Tao? And the real importance is not that it's old, but that it's been continuous. And why did the sages from ancient times, who are all dead, obviously, leave us their wisdom? It doesn't benefit them at all. But they knew that every generation after them was going to face the same difficult problems that their generation saw. And so unselfishly, they left us their words. The other reason why we turn to the ancient wisdom is because it's been tested and proven. So we don't always turn to the most trendy thing, the recent ideas, and so on. And I know that there's a great emphasis on innovation and the new and the fresh. And this is contrary to that. It's the emphasis on the old and venerable. So if we can turn to that and interpret it for our times, then we have the best of both worlds. The kind of crisis that we're seeing today was not unknown in the time that the sages were writing. In the time of the Tao Te Ching, it was called the Warring States era. And it was more than 275 years of constant warfare. There were 7 states vying with each other, and they each tried to dominate the other one. In the United States, at least, we haven't really known war on our territory very often. But in other parts of the world, there have been many wars fought on people's homelands. These wars were fought in the places where people lived, and they were terrible wars. So crisis, difficulty has always been with us. In addition to the political problems, China in the old days had flooding, drought, famine, and these were annual occurrences. They didn't have modern medicine, and so their health problems were actually more challenging, despite the fact that herbology and acupuncture were very strong. So I don't know that we have an especially big crisis, or rather we should say that the human existence is always one of crisis. but we have to deal with it. And that's why turning to the ancient wisdom can give us guidance.
You know, Ming-Dao, it's almost like I'm speaking of modern developed, generally Western, but not only society today. It's almost like we've reached a point of such success and comfort and ease and convenience that the scale has slidden back towards, well, let's create some drama then. It's almost like there's a lot of examples of, you know, I think I'm going to go have a problem with this. I'm going to go have a problem with that. And when you contrast that to what we call the third world, the most suffering, the least developed uh, societies on the planet, when you contrast that against what they're going through, it is staggering and at once, at least for me, silencing, humbling. But the point I want to make is just that it seems like modern society has grown bored with itself and is constantly reaching and grasping for some kind of a chew toy for the ego, which I've said in other videos, something to chew on, something to some form of conflict, some form of tension, almost as if the species tends to kind of need it or perhaps doesn't know what to do without it.
Well, can we tease that out a little bit first?
Sure.
Well, you mentioned the contrast between third world countries and developing countries. And so let's also, as a shorthand, say that that is the difference between an agrarian society and a technological one. In an agrarian society, there are natural limits. Yes, we have lamented the fact that there was famine and drought and flooding and so on. But the fact that these natural limits existed shaped society, and they limited what a person could do. In those developing countries and in China in the old days, a person's energy was the real measure. You had to walk everywhere. You had to do things by hand. If you had wanted your clothes washed, you had to do it yourself or hire somebody to do it or have servants to do it. There were natural limitations. In the developing world, we blew past all those limitations, but they didn't change our basic personality. And our basic personality is set up to deal with limits, to push against those limits, to work every day. And so, since those reflexes aren't needed anymore, then I think we still have the need to face conflicts. And if we don't have those conflicts in our natural life, then yes, maybe that proclivity in us starts running amok by itself. And so we manufacture those things, or can we just say we have the luxury of whining about political issues or don't take away my gun or whatever? But in actual life, if you were in a developing country, you wouldn't have that luxury whatsoever. Everything would be in its own place. Maybe you actually would have a gun because you would need it for defense against wild animals and so on. Can I note that in other countries, let me just use Australia, for example, guns are illegal, but farmers can have guns and they need them to kill animals that might be a threat to them, but you don't see them going around doing mass murder. So I think because we live in a society of great luxury, but we cannot expunge those human needs to deal with conflict and to deal with limits and so on, then we start to make them up ourselves. So it's an indulgence, really. And this is part of following Tao too. People like to say, oh, Tao is unlimited. Yes, Tao is unlimited. It doesn't mean a human being ever will be unlimited. A human being has to deal with limits. When the Taoists say be natural, or they talk about non-action, they're really implying that you want to use natural forces. If a ball is thrown, it's going to go on an arc and it's going to fall down. Then you use that. It's silly to think that the ball will throw itself. It's not, that's not going to happen. And the ball isn't going to fly to the moon either. So how can we use natural principles? Don't you see that those natural principles also have inherent limits? And those limits aren't bad. They help to shape our world. But we have been so seduced by modern advertising that says, oh, no limits, blow past your limit, have an unlimited life, have endless joy. Well, that's the problem, is that we have talked ourselves into believing that limits aren't good. So until we can get a handle on that, you see, sort of pathologically, we create our own limits. Oh, I'm not in favor of Democrats. Oh, I'm not in favor of this. I'm not in favor of that. You see, that limits us, but it's an artificial set of limits. So I hope that we can start to find our way around that, because until we do, we're going to start or continue to repeat all these endless problems that entangle us.
I have to say something that may be a bit contentious, but I have to say it for me to remain authentic regarding the issue of, and this is not what our conversation is about, but it's just a touch response. The issue of, pro or anti-gun, and some people need guns for this and other, etc. It's not just against wild animals that guns equalize the battlefield between predator and intended victim. It's also against tyranny, tyrants. And it's always been shown in history that tyrants have always disarmed their subjects, so to speak, before they took over and enslaved them in one manner or another. And if it isn't guns, then it's going to be machetes and knives. I mean, in the US, you mentioned the mass murder thing, horrendous, unforgivable, horrible. But if you look into the statistics of the individuals who committed those mass shootings and everything, there is an unbelievable commonality in their traits of how they were brought up, under what conditions, and etc. And it's mental unwellness, it's mental illness. The collective is not necessarily mentally well. And where it is guns in the United States, it's machetes and knives in China and Kunming at the train station. If where guns are banned, they'll grab the next weapon they can. So it's not that we're saying the weapon causes and creates and is inherently evil. It depends, like fire, how it's used. Fire can be used to warm a family on a sub-zero freezing night and keep them alive. And at the same time, it can be used to burn down Lahaina. So I just want to address that, that's very complex.
Power is neutral.
Yeah.
So I have a plug in the wall. What I plug into it is going to determine the use of the energy, but the energy itself is not going to have a particular viewpoint.
There you go.
Why are people, however, mentally ill to the point of, committing mass murder and so on? That is an indictment of our society. It's not an indictment of guns per se, or train stations for that matter.
Yeah.
You have to ask why people are doing that and why they cannot find the treatment to take care of themselves. And you mentioned that people are being trained in this way, or they're having in their background. And so we have this problem in our society where people are not being well educated about their options or about their responsibility to other people and society. So we do have to attend to this because the mental illness and the problems of so many people, and you name people in different areas of the world, is getting worse. And we need to try to reach out and help those people. By the time it becomes mass murder, it's way too late, right? We should have had that intercession back in grade school, shouldn't we? And the problem is we cannot depend on any single method of doing that. And we cannot force people to do that. Churches and religions are declining around the world, so you can't depend on that. There isn't the conformity that existed, let's say, 70 years ago around the world in different societies. And things are always changing. Plus, you have all these demagogues and mad people going around trying to greedily get something for themselves. And they will say and do anything to get a following. Here's the problem. They are playing a game. They just want your vote or your money. But the people who listen to them think that they're dispensing real ideas. And that's part of the confusion. So it's all about, but the main theme is that we are lacking the restraint of ethical thinking, of morality, of compassion, of a sense of responsibility for other people. And this is part of Tao as well. Tao is not just about, oh, it's a mystical flow and I'm having a great time. It asks us what our responsibility is to other people. Now, you mentioned all these people, you mentioned mass movements and so on. From the point of view of Tao, the common person is still the decider. And it's how common people think. Now, the difference is that in the time of the Tao Te Ching or Zhuangzi, the common person was considered wise. Why? Because they conformed to the natural limitations of life. They were agrarian, they had to follow the seasons, they had to work the fields and so on. In ancient China, something like 80% or more of the people were peasants. So that's why the Tao Te Ching could set up this dichotomy between the elite ruling class and the common person, and found that the common person was much wiser than the elites. Now, we don't have that problem, or perhaps our problem is that we have let the elites so take over society, so suppress the common person, so confuse people with these divisive ideas that it's very hard to bring that wisdom to the front. But we must, and that's part of Tao as well. We can't be famous. We can't necessarily be powerful, but we must speak up and we must support the weak and help other people.
Absolutely. Totally agree. There's a male suicide epidemic in the United States. I did a recent post on that. Over 100, it's like 105, 110 men per day in the United States alone end their lives. I think that they feel completely forgotten, helpless, unimportant, nobody cares, hopeless, all of this kind of stuff. And so I wholeheartedly agree. If especially if we know someone personally that we know or suspect is suffering, because a lot of times it will be quietly alone. They won't advertise it. Somebody that's in a serious pit of despair will probably not be reaching out about it. They will be way down in it. And it's possible that if we care enough, if we reach out, we could save someone from a fate like that where they self-delete or turn it outwards and do some hideous, violent thing against others. as we mentioned. Um,
You use the word possible. It's imperative.
yeah,
Have to do it.
yeah, because it's a crisis state at this point. And I'm
Oh,
not,
sure.
please don't think, any of our viewers as well, don't think that I am excluding the women. It's just that 80% of suicides are male. So I'm speaking of the majority in one shot. It's very disproportionate. And that's just one of the things we talked about, the mass shootings, we talked about, all that kind of stuff, because people are flipping out, they're not well. And especially, not only, but especially with men, they are less likely, less inclined, less of a proclivity to reach out and ask for help. It's just not a very male trait. And on the other side of that coin is they don't have nearly the resources and options as women have. And so they're really hurting. And some of them may be watching. And I hope that we can help in some way. I have two friends. I'll never, of course, dishonor their identity, but I have two friends that struggle with this constantly. And I think that almost any man has had the thought, or at least wondered, if not considered, the option in times of most unbearable difficulty in his life. And so, as you say, it is imperative. We have to help carry each other. We have to be accessible. That's one of the things I said you are. You're very accessible, which is why I honor you so much.
Well, I have some thoughts about that, but I think the first most important thing is that any one of us can listen. And if someone reaches out to you, don't say, hey, I'm too busy, or start talking about something else.
Right.
Somebody's hurting, you can see it. And if you just take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just have a genuine exchange, eye contact, hold a hand, take them out for a beer, you can break the cycle. And before we go on, we should also say that if there's anyone listening to this video who has thoughts of suicide, we do urge you to reach out, because everybody should be saved. And
Let
sorry,
I apologize. Let me just add, before we move out from this. This applies completely to this situation, and it is something that I found myself advising. I have a very dear friend who's a monk, and I was at the monastery visiting him when his father died, and he was distraught over it. And he said, and he was from Mexico, and he said, I have to go back to Mexico to my father's funeral, and I don't even know how I'm going to be able to be there, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm so wrecked. And I said, there's only two things. Number one, be fully present. Number two, be fully love. That's it. Just be in that state. Be fully present and be fully love. And that's what you just described by ways you can do that. Look into their eyes, reach out to them, offer your time, listen, be present, invite them to go and spend some time with you doing something a little more lighthearted. It can make all the difference in the world. So it's not only for these times of crisis or great pain that we do well to remember to be fully present and fully love, but how much of each waking moment of our days and our weeks and our months can we be fully present and be fully love? We often have no idea what an impact we have had on somebody, and sometimes neither did they until much later. And so, yes, be fully present and be fully love.
I agree with that. And let me just um, expand on that a little bit by telling you one of the lines from the Tao Te Ching.
Mm.
It says that the sage saves the good person, and the sage saves the not good person. Well, doesn't that end up being everybody? And that means that when we are trying to save someone, We don't make any judgments about them. So think about a first responder who rushes into a burning building. They don't go, is this a Democrat? Is this a Republican? Is this a nice guy or not a nice guy? No, you just try to save them. Or someone who's been shot or in a car accident. You don't ask those questions. Your duty is to save everybody. And that's the standard that I hope each one of us would take. Now, you said, how often can we be present? But what else are you going to do in life? Watch TV? Get your next meal? Have a drink? It's when you're fully present that you're fully human. And you have to believe that being human is the power that saves someone. Don't think, oh, I don't know the techniques. I never read any books on how to save people. I'm not a psychologist. That's not the point. Even with professionals, you can tell when they don't really care. They may have the degree, they may say all the right things, they can cite the studies, but you're in their office and you go, hey, this guy doesn't really care about me. And so the ingredient is the humanity, not the technique. And everybody is capable of it if they care. But we've been talking about Tao, and one of the ideas that I'd like to present is from the I Ching, and it's about perseverance. And just that idea of perseverance is, for me, so important. Because even when things are bad, you don't give up. The worst thing you can do is to give up. If you don't give up, you can continue to cultivate yourself, continue to help people, continue to do good things. But as soon as you give up, then things start to drift. So in the I Ching, it talks about the cycles of life. So just very coarsely, things are either yin or yang, but they have to continue to circulate between the two. And when everything is yin at its most extreme, it must change to the opposite. So when you are facing a life that is bleak and awful and dark, then it has to change to the opposite. There's no other option. By the same token, when life is wonderful and great, you know it can decline. And that's when you save. That's when you are prudent. You accumulate your resources and you share. Because if you share your good fortune and spread it out, then you stave off that decline. It's that simple. When things are bad, they have to get better. And when things are good, they can easily get bad. This is part of the wisdom of the Tao as well. And while people may find that unsatisfying, it's also a set principle that will always happen. And what's the only overriding factor? It's the human determination to see through those cycles. That's why you can never give up. That's why you should always persevere. And if you can apply that to a practice, cultivating yourself, study, then eventually you will accumulate so much human wisdom that you can start to override bad circumstance. That's something that we should all attend to.
You remind me of the Chinese proverb that when anything is pushed, anything that is pushed to its extreme becomes its opposite.
That's right out of the I Ching.
Yep.
And
And
that's the whole point.
that's the principle you just illustrated. And
Right.
and
Right.
also you reminded me of the quote by the Buddha, who said that essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, the sage remains the same amidst both praise and blame, like a mountain in a storm. Okay, and I'm paraphrasing that, but basically,
Okay.
amidst the full spectrum and extremes of experiences, in this case, it was both praise and blame. You're being uplifted, you're being scorned. You remain steadfastly centered and at peace within, abiding in your true nature. And yeah, life is made of the ups and downs, the ins and outs, the good and the bad, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and what's important is that we remain the constant amidst those conditions.
Right. But how is that possible? Because you have to
Connectivity.
define, well, yes, but you have to define yourself first. You have to have your own standard. If you do things for the sake of praise or you're running from blame, that's not really having a centered personal standard.
Right.
So the sage, in your quote, can be that way because the sage isn't really looking to external circumstances to validate themselves. You have to know that you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. And yet, so many of us are unconsciously living our lives by the following formula: what I think others think I should do. We live by that, trying to get approval, likes, all this kind of stuff. We're trying to get approval externally by a code or a format of trying to follow what we think others think we should be doing. And boy, is that a recipe for suffering.
Well, yes, because as you already indicated earlier in our conversation, the crowd doesn't know what it's doing. So if you try to go by what others think, you're going to find a very inconsistent set of inputs. Now, I happen to have a different background because I've always wanted to be an artist. So that meant that nobody thought I was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So I have had to, since, youth, follow my own path and know that I was doing the right thing. And you know what? Well, first of all, a lot of the people who told me I should do this and that are dead. The rest of them ruined their lives, didn't add up to much. So if you think that you're going to listen to other people and get your input from that, you're not going to have a very reliable life. You have to know what you want to do. And then everyone will say, oh, what a genius you are. But really, it's because you were left alone and you had to define things for yourself.
Ming-Dao, you always remind me, of these wonderful quotes, which are basically congealed truths. uh,
Yes.
Matsuo Basho. Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise. Seek what they sought. In other words, don't try to emulate how other people before you lived. Rather, pursue the same noble truths and understandings and etc. But you do you. You do it in your way. Uh, Seek what they sought. Don't seek to copy how they sought. You know.
Yeah. And I think here's the problem. We are trained to respect authority.
Mm.
So if a famous PhD person said this, then we go, oh, okay, I'll follow that. Well, he must know more than I do.
Yeah.
But, when you start to read the biographies of these people, well, they didn't quite know what they were doing, right? And if you look at what they sought, you can see that a lot of them, including Nobel Prize winners, fell short of their own standard. So rather than ape them, follow that advice. Look at the star that they were navigating by, and you navigate by that star.
There is a tendency towards deference, oh well, this, this guy knows more, this woman is the expert. And I heard it said, it's kind of funny, an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less.
Yeah, yeah. You invoked the name of the Buddha, and Buddha told us that life was suffering. So it doesn't matter how famous, how beautiful, how rich, how celebrated a person is, I guarantee you, they experience the same suffering as the rest of us.
I believe
In
that.
in that sense, we are all equal. And it's because of that suffering that you shouldn't look at what they have done to relieve themselves because it only applies to them. You look for what they stand for, or as we were just discussing, the goals that they were shooting for, and it's better to go for that. But the other aspect is not to just go for perfecting yourself, as important as that is, not to go for achievement in your chosen career, as important as that is, but to also remember to be compassionate and take care of other people because everyone is suffering. We've highlighted the ideas of those people who are so despondent that they're considering suicide, but they are not an exception. They're not an unusual, odd subgroup of humanity.
Right.
Everyone's suffering.
And then if someone is unable to endure the suffering and decides to end it, a massive wave of suffering is then sent out to those who loved them. And I've seen this happen. And it's not just suffering, it's not just pain. There is resentment and anger in there as well, and understandably so. But I don't mean to blame anybody, and I'm as compassionate as I can with the whole thing. But we have to understand that we are part of something far bigger than us alone, and everything affects everything. And so, while if somebody ended it, those closest who love them most around them are gonna be hit with a wave of suffering. That may resonate. It may resonate for generations. But on the other hand, also, those who love that person around them need also to be helping like a balm to the soul of that person, even in small ways. And this is not to say we can fix anybody. We can't, but we can love them. As the meme I saw said, I have not come to heal you. I have come to love you. Love will heal you, or at least love will sustain you.
Well, can I expand on that a little bit?
Hope you will.
I've been giving a lot of thought to the fact that every person has to be both an individual and a member of the collective. You have to be both. It's not either or. And one of the big problems is to reconcile the personal with the communal. Can we look for a minute at anyone's role as a member of the collective? You are your parents' child. Perhaps you have siblings, and maybe you're a parent yourself. So let's look at you in your family line. Can we pluck you out of that line without altering the family? We cannot. So everybody is part of a virtually limitless lineage. And whether you're important or not important, good or bad, whatever, we cannot remove you from that line without altering the line. So therefore, we cannot lose a single person without altering the whole. Now, every person also has to be responsible for him or herself, yes? They have to take care of themselves. They have to make themselves stronger and wiser. But then having done that, it's not just for personal fulfillment, but also to help the collective. So yes, we cannot lose anybody without being affected. And you mentioned your friend who is the monk who lost his father. And so his pattern has been altered, and he feels that tremendous loss. So let's not try to figure out, well, because he loved his dad, blah, 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 blah. No, the pattern has been altered, and there's a huge gap now. That's why we reach out to help everyone. Death is inevitable. Death is natural. But what shall I say? I don't want to say optional, but useless kinds of loss, those are not helpful, and they affect everybody. Now, we are going to have death, and we are going to have grief. And your friend is about to go through a very long period of mourning. This is part of life as well. I would not be who I am without having gone through grief. And it's not over in a couple weeks, like, oh, why did you get over it? No, it takes years and years and years. And there's almost a little club out here of unacknowledged club of people who have lost others. And you know it when you meet someone. You know if they've lost someone. But what's in that sadness? There is something on the other side of grief. It takes a long time to get there, like years, but there is something on the other side, and that is remembrance. We who have lost people remember those who are gone. Is that just a habit? Is that just some weird quirk? No, it's part of the process. Because when we're still here after we lost people and we stand as the monuments to remembrance, we are alive and we pass on that remembrance to other people. We're back to the collective again. And that's, although it's a very long process, a circuitous process, that eventually is how even grief goes back into enhancing the collective. And it has to be because of the person who testifies to that grief. It's no fun. It's awful. No one wants to do it. But in the process, you find out that you must do it. That's an important part of life as well. And I hope that your friend will see that. We went back, we were talking about people who are so despondent that they're thinking of taking their lives. But if they don't, they become those repositories of remembrance. They will reach out to other people because they will recognize the same desperation. And that's how we all progress and pull each other forward. We have to do that. And that is Tao as well. Tao means a path. We're all walking on that path. If someone is having a trouble or stumbling, don't we stop to help them? Someone doesn't have food, don't we feed them? Someone's sick, don't we carry them? Because we have to keep moving. And it's only human generosity and compassion that counters the misfortunes of life. I want to just say something about love. Love is the one value that nurtures life. Life is the one value that everyone in the world can agree upon. Even the despot wants to live. Even the tyrant threatens people. Why? Because they're threatening the loss of life. So life is the universal value, and the only way to nurture life is with love. I'm going to say something that other people find controversial. but I still believe it. Death is not the opposite of life. There is no opposite of life. Death is just a transitional point embedded in life. And so love is unlimited. We need love to nurture life. And if you can align yourself with love and with life, you align yourself with the endless, the infinite, the powerful. So we were talking about Tao from ancient times. We value Tao from ancient times because it's an unbroken thread that started from the very beginning of the cosmos and comes through our lives today. And the power of that thread is life and love. And that's all you need to know in order to follow Tao.
Life is sacred in all its forms and in all its stages. And love is the highest expression of life. And we must live that. Everyone who's watching now, we can say that within our lifetimes, I don't think it's ever been more needed than it is now. Um, and if so, well, it's still needed badly now. And we must be fully present, and we must be fully love. Anything less is inadequate in these trying times. And we can return to the wellspring of the wisdom that is offered by the ancient Tao between Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, and Liezi, and the I Ching. There is great and timeless, we say ancient, but really timeless wisdom that has been freely given, preserved, and shared with us by the ancients, because in fact, we always need it.
Yes.
I think that we'll leave it there, Ming-Dao. And I thank you with all my heart for everything that you have offered and shared today. You are a wonderful, wonderful friend. And thank you for honoring me with this, your 5th visit to our platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.